Dude, what the fuck is this? Thing is some kind of anime? Hold still. Oh, fuck off. I'm over this.
Hi, my name's Rust. I'm a Soulsborne content creator with an emphasis on PvP. Strafing is one of the most difficult skills to learn in Elden Ring. There's a lot of intricacies to understanding exactly how to strafe different weapons and movesets, but the reward for learning this skill is paid out in dividends. Strafes open up a range of aggressive plays and counterplays, allowing you to outmaneuver your opponent and position yourself to punish them for massive damage. However, the most important reason to learn strafes is that it looks really edgy and cool. In this video, I'm first going to go over the necessary information that you need to know to be able to strafe attacks consistently and go over the pitfalls that might cause you to fail, and give you the tools that you need to improve your success. There's a lot that went into this research, and first and foremost, a huge thank you to Frosty for the contributions to handy tech, and to Wella for the tips on getting around curved greatswords and for helping with scripting. For the testers, another huge thank you to Woznow and 4K graphics card, who spent several hours with me testing all these different techniques. Please go support my friends by following them over on Twitch, links in the description. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you found the information helpful at all, or if you're just more confused than ever. Every technique in this video assumes that the opponent is locked onto you. There are strategies to counter strafing, but for the purpose of this video, it's assumed that the opponent isn't incorporating these strategies. There are two factors at play for any successful strafe: timing and positioning. Positioning refers to the position that you stand relative to the opponent when you start the strafe and the path that you take to avoid their hit. Every weapon has a limited amount of tracking on their attacks, however some things are more strafable than others. Something like a crouch L1 from Greatswords has nearly perfect tracking, so if you just run around them in circles, then you're not going to strafe it. Other things like a running attack from a Colossal Sword have limited tracking but a sweeping hitbox that makes it very difficult to avoid. But that doesn't make either of these things unstrafable. It just takes the proper setup. This can be heavily influenced by having your opponent in an animation that limits their tracking prior to beginning your strafe, such as by putting them in hit stun, or beginning the strafe as they exit a roll. Timing for a strafe is highly variable, being largely contingent on the latency that you have to your opponent, but the variable of latency can be substantially mitigated by how you set up the strafe. Timing can be broken down into three categories, being negative priority, neutral, and in advantage. To start with, I'll be covering strafing while in advantage. Advantage in this case means that you've put your opponent in a hit stun, and your strafe is assuming that they are attempting to mash out a hit stun. Strafing while in advantage negates the effects of high latency, since your strafe will begin prior to the opponent's ability to track your position. This takes the timing out of the equation, and all you have to do is focus on your positioning. By putting the opponent in hit stun, you limit the ability of their character model to properly track you as you take your first few steps. But even with this setup, it's not enough to get around the majority of attacks. But there's two methods for canceling the recovery of your attack animations that will allow you to successfully avoid an attempted attack that you would otherwise be unable to strafe. There are two types of cancels that I'll quickly cover, being handy tech and crouch canceling. Crouch canceling is pretty straightforward. While holding sprint and a direction, tap crouch in order to cancel the remaining recovery frames of your animation. You have to already be holding sprint, otherwise you'll just input a roll or a backstep by mistake. Crouch canceling is good for getting around weapons with limited tracking and a high arc in its animation. A two-handed curved greatsword can be strafed to the left with crouch canceling after putting them in hit stun with a crouch poke from a Colossal Sword. This is less effective with smaller weapons since they have a shorter stun duration. Crouch canceling comes at the cost of significant loss in movement speed, so it really only applies to just a few weapons, most notably being the two-handed curved greatsword, colossal weapons, and scythes. Handy tech is a little more involved. Handy tech is either the use of toggling to two-handed weapon or soft swapping. Either of these work, but they share the unique property of not only canceling the recovery of your attack animation, but also giving you earlier access to full sprinting speed, where it would otherwise take you about 2 full steps before you reached full sprint. Again, it's important to note that the type of weapon that you use to put the opponent in hit stun has consequences. As an example, you can't strafe a Colossal Sword if you hit them with the standing R1 of a straight sword. However, you can strafe them if you use the standing R1 of a Greatsword. But you still require the use of a recovery cancel in order to be successful. Now, just because you can strafe something doesn't mean you always should. With the use of handy tech and a weapon that deals a damage level 2 stun, you can strafe something like the L1 of power stance Greatswords. But due to the fast recovery of their attacks, it's likely that any attempt to punish it after succeeding the strafe will cause you to eat a face full of damage. Effectively, anything with very fast attacks and short recovery, spears, twin blades, straight swords, just aren't worth the attempt. However, other things with a longer recovery, like Greatswords and curved Greatswords, are pretty reliable to punish on an attempted mash, and with the hyper armor being as strong as it is right now, it's good to have this knowledge in your back pocket in order to deal with it. It's most dangerous to attempt to strafe out of neutral, where you have no prior information to let you know whether or not your timing is right. As latencies reach higher and higher numbers, strafing from neutral becomes increasingly unreliable, and you have to predict further and further into the future of when and where you need to position yourself in order to successfully strafe an attack. But there's two versions of attacks that have modified tracking, making it much easier to strafe these attacks rather than just the standing R1s, these being the running and rolling attacks. Strafing these share a common theme. The tighter that your strafe is around the opponent's character model, the better your success. Because math things and circles. Your goal is to disrupt the tracking of your opponent's weapon by forcing it to make too tight of a turn to sufficiently track your position. Running attacks generally have a lot of root motion being the amount of space that the opponent's body moves during an animation, so spacing just outside of the standing R1 range gives you your best results, and depending on the weapon, this position has some variability. Halberds make a great example of this. Their running R1 is very easy to strafe, just requiring you to move in and to the right, and causing them to swing around your character as they attempt to track you. The running R2 on the Halberd is much more troublesome, having a wide arc that swings from left to right. It's still better to try and strafe this by going to the right, but contrary to the running R1, you have to double back behind yourself and follow the opponent's back, since the tracking will attempt to keep up with you as you go by. This is much harder on higher latencies, and things often start to look really bizarre as you almost phase through your opponent's body if you go for a strafe. Two-handed curved greatswords, normal greatswords, and colossal weapons all have a unique strafe where it's optimal to crouch strafe to the right in order to avoid the attack, and it most often swings right over your head. Power stance movesets have a unique feature where one of the two attacks will do a decreased amount of poise damage, such as in the case of power stance straight swords. The first sword will only do about 32 poise damage, where the second sword does about 150. So you can strafe it to the right very comfortably, allowing yourself to get hit by the first sword and being in good position to be able to punish the second with a backstab. But in most cases, strafing running attacks generally works about the same. Start just outside of the range of the standing R1s, and go to the side where the tracking is weakest. Rolling attacks can be strafed almost any time the opponent rolls toward you. If they roll away from you, then you're very unlikely to successfully strafe an attack. This is due to the fact that you'd have to close the gap between them as they're rolling away in order to start your strafe on time. Keep in mind that strafing a rolling attack is very different than strafing a crouch attack out of neutral. Rolling attacks have limited initial tracking as they exit the roll, making it easy to get around what might otherwise be unstrafable. In the instance of power stance great spears, if you run around them in circles while they sit and crouch, they'll always be able to hit you. But if you start your strafe as they exit the roll, then you'll be able to get around them pretty comfortably. This applies to pretty much everything, however, some weapons have more of a sweeping attack that's not really reliably strafed. On something like a katana, the rolling attack arcs wide and will pretty much always catch you. However, this can be abused on the power stance moveset, where you can strafe to the left, and as long as you're only hit by one of the katanas, then you'll only receive 75 poise damage, allowing you to take a backstab. Once again, curved greatswords have a bit of a spotlight, where their two-handed rolling attacks can be crouch strafed to the left very reliably. Now, if your opponent has advantage over you, having put you in hit stun, then if they ever go for a follow-up attack, you will not be able to strafe it. You cannot strafe the standing R1 out of hit stun. However, if you manage to dodge a running or jumping attack and avoid the phantom hit, then the possibilities are still open to you. Running and jumping attacks have a longer recovery time in their follow-up swings, which allows you to have the opportunity to strafe after rolling these attacks. A key decider in your successfulness of the strafe is the presence of a phantom hit. If you roll an opponent's attack and get phantom hit, then it means that you didn't roll early enough with respect to the latency that you have with them, and any follow-up attack that they go for is likely to land. If you roll and avoid the phantom hit, then these strafes are still possible. From this point of the video, I'm going to go over each weapon by category with explanations on how to strafe from an advantage, neutral, and, if possible, negative priority. For the sake of brevity, I'll only be covering things that are strafable. If it's not there, then it's not strafable. Otherwise, I just forgot about it and who knows. Ultimately, my main goal is to teach you that the setup of the strafe is crucial. That each of these strafes is only possible because of a number of factors. Locking the rotation of your opponent prior to the strafe, recovery cancels to improve strafing, and pathing. The idea is that if you learn the first two concepts well enough, then you can figure out the third well enough on your own if you're unsure if something is strafable or not. But with that, let's get into the list. To reiterate, strafing is entirely dependent on your timing and positioning. You can improve your timing by scanning for phantom hits while you're negative priority, or by putting the opponent in hit stun prior to the strafe, to guarantee that your strafe won't be affected by bad latency. Positioning can be improved by implementing tools like handy tech or crouch canceling to ensure that you can outspace the tracking of the opponent's weapon. This video took hours upon hours of dedicated time and effort, and a lot of help from the community, so please like and subscribe, and be sure to check out everyone that helped out on this project. But that's going to do it for this video. I hope that you learned something useful, and I'll catch you in the next one.